This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Diamine Earl Grey. Now, I've been curious about this ink because, like most of the inks in my collection, I've used it almost entirely in fine nibbed pens. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this ink performs in other nib sizes. So I'm going to start with the Pilot 78G and an extra fine nib. Now, it started out, I was kind of surprised. It was doing really well, but it just feels really dry. And there are two types of inks feeling dry. There's actually when the ink's not even wanting to come out of the nib. It feels like it's dried up in the nib. The ink is coming out, but it feels dry on the paper. It feels like the nib doesn't have ink in it. And this looks good, but it just doesn't feel good. All right. Next, I've got a Pilot Pereira with a fine nib. Usually, this will feel quite a bit smoother than the extra fine. And it did feel quite a bit smoother at first, and now I'm getting that dry feeling. It feels like I'm running out of ink. I'm not running out of ink, but it's just, this isn't a very saturated ink. Next, I've got a Pilot 78G with a medium nib. Now, so far it's feeling glassy smooth. And it's still feeling smooth. Now, that was very nice. That felt very smooth. So, I have to remember that. All right, I've got another Pilot Pereira with the stub cursive medium nib, or the also known as the 1.0 stub. Now, almost every one of these pens, or I will say this, every one of these pens has initially felt very smooth, and then by the end it feels dry, even though the ink is not running dry. All of them except for the medium. The medium was smooth through the entire writing sample. But all the others have, had that dry feeling. Okay. This is a Nemesis Singularity with a 0.6 stub. Classy smooth so far. I like the amount of ink it's putting down. This is wetter than the other. See, quite a bit wetter than the other nibs so far. This one I like on this paper, on this Tomoe River paper. All right, and finally, Jinhao X750 with the 1.5 stub. I've been curious about this one. All right. I'm going to let that dry a little bit while we take a look at some writing samples on other papers. On my ARC notebook paper, I didn't like this ink. Let me see. Except for the medium nib. The medium nib was nice, surprisingly, compared to all the others. This ink is one of those that kind of soaks into the paper relatively quickly and wants to spread out, and I thought, oh, this is going to be bleeding really bad through the paper. Well, not really that bad. Some of the wetter nibs it bled through. Really just the two stub nibs, the Diamine stub and the 1.5 stub, those two wetter nibs. The rest didn't bleed through, but they soaked into the paper really quickly and just felt dry and scratchy. But like I said, except for the Pilot 78G medium. It's a nice smooth nib, and I guess, you know, the size of it just works with that ink. On the Rhodia paper, which is a smoother paper, again, the medium was glassy smooth, and the Diamine was nice and smooth, and I put hearts by these two. These are the two that I would use this ink in. You know, the 1.5 stub, it was nice and smooth. I really just got this stub nib mainly for testing ink. I don't really use it that often for everyday writing, but except for those two, it, you know, wasn't that pleasant to write with. And again, the Pilot Pereira, it's looking a little more pale. Let's see. On 20-pound copy paper, it is so absorbent. I did not like this at all. This was like writing with a really wet magic marker on paper. You can see how the ink really spreads on all of these. Felt dry and scratchy in a lot of the nibs. In the medium nib, it wasn't really scratchy, but the ink just spread out too much. Now, surprisingly, it's just like the ARC notebook paper. It's not really wanting to bleed through. The fine, it almost bled through a little bit, but it performs okay on this paper. It just doesn't look that great. There's nothing special about it, and it doesn't feel good. So, on the Leuchtturm, I'm curious to see. There's no sheen. This is a nice, just velvety, flat kind of, well, I won't say flat ink. There's like a halo to it. It's a nice gray ink with some character. If you have maybe a medium or a broad nib or a stub nib like this, it gives your writing just a little bit of character, but it's not just way out there unusual. All right, and on the Tomoe River paper, this is what I've been curious about. Does this ink do anything unusual? I'm not seeing any sheen. There's just some nice subtle shading. Now this 78G medium nib looks like it's a little bit dry, not in an unpleasant, I didn't feel it when I was writing, it was nice and smooth, but it's just a pale gray ink on this paper. My favorite pen to use with this ink is my Pilot Custom 74. It's a fine nib, but it puts down a little bit more ink than this, and I like how it looks on the paper, and I like how it feels writing with it. My TWSBI Mini with a fine nib is also very smooth, and I like writing with it, but my favorite is the Custom 74. It's a little bit wetter than the TWSBI. But I also like the Diamine 0.6. This is an ink that you really need good quality paper for. It's just really unpleasant writing on absorbent paper with this ink. This is a very watery ink. All right, that was an interesting experiment. In this case, it confirmed what I already knew, but that's the fun thing about doing this, playing with these inks. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.